no joke. I went to a pig farm and I would write for as long as I wanted to, and then I'd go walk and go play with the pigs or go on a hike or, something like that.
Did
And
they
for a
know you were
solid
there?
week,
Were you an invited guest of the pig farm, or you just went and squatted on a pig farm?
I'm like, I'm about to get dirty. Let's do this.
Like, that's your next book. I want that story. Happy Friday, y'all. I'm Brendan Bradley with the Fifth Wall Forum, committed to bringing together industry insiders from the theater and technology worlds to create opportunities for new kinds of virtual performance. And today, I'm having a conversation with Stephanie Riggs, a creative director and technologist, and the author of The End of Storytelling. That's right, it's over. And my fellow founding member of the Fifth Wall Forum. Today's conversation is brought to you by the Fifth Wall Forum's Discord channel, a robust community of almost 300 technologists and artists sharing job postings, tutorials, upcoming performances, and the home of Artifact Friday, where our mentors and collaborators share artifacts from their work, giving the Fifth Wall Forum members a first glimpse at the latest innovation in immersive storytelling. Find out more at our website at fifthwallforum.com. That's 5thwallforum.com. Stephanie, welcome to the conversation.
Hey, happy to be here.
So I think we should get right into it. You are one of the founding members of the Fifth Wall Forum. We were all corralled by a tweet. Do you want to talk about how you got involved and became like the leader of this amazing adventure?
I don't think I'm a leader of this as much as, a starfish is a leader. I don't know if you ever read the book, The Spider and the Starfish, but, one has a head that if you cut it off, it can't function. And the rest, the starfish, functions on its own. And everybody who is leading the way with Fifth Wall Forum has their own background, and they bring something unique to the table. So it's been wild to see how somebody with a background in architecture and somebody with a background in investment, somebody background in Broadway and somebody with a background in teaching and choreography and acting, how we can all come together and realize that there's such tremendous potential for everybody to come together and create something new and bold.
So all humility aside, let's talk about your background. For those that don't know, you gave a wonderful, was it officially TEDx Broadway talk?
Yes.
In November?
Yes, it was.
You can check that out on YouTube. We'll probably link it and wherever you're listening to this. But do you want to talk about, you gave a little bit of your journey in that talk, but for those that did not get to enjoy it yet, tell us how you came to the immersive technologist space.
I came to the immersive technologist space by flunking coding classes multiple times.
Excellent.
Yes, I went to Carnegie Mellon as a directing major for theater, and I didn't know anything about coding. I didn't know anything about computers, so now I'm definitely dating myself. But you go there and you have to code. You have to code HTML to graduate. And I could not wrap my brain around what this was until I started thinking about coding as story. And there being a place where you can have multiple potential storylines happening simultaneously. And this is a girl from Georgia who was trying to put up plays in the park without realizing, when you're 15, 14 and not realizing there's permits and regulations involved and things along those lines. But no, I failed my coding class multiple times, and I was like on the dean's list and on probation at the same time, which pretty much describes the rest of my life. And once I figured it out, and especially human computer interaction side of computer science, and I started playing around with building virtual worlds and head mounted displays back in the 90s, I was hooked. I was hooked. I was like, oh, this is it. This is where the things that I was trying to do by removing the narrative from the stage can actually happen. And of course, the history goes, VR implodes in the late 90s, and there's nowhere for me to go. So what I ended up doing was balancing those worlds of narrative, of story, and technology, and doing everything from working with Walt Disney Imagineering for Hong Kong Disneyland's theatrical shows, to startups in the engineering and game design space, to ultimately leading research labs at like Yale's blended reality research group, and collaborating with NYU's Future Realities Lab. and working as a creative director at Refinery 29. Our flagship event there is 29 rooms, which, ultimately Refinery 29 got bought by Vice Media. So there's been this kind of curiosity that has driven me between the narrative and the technology. And finally, it's coming together. And it's so, so, so exciting to see people discovering the potential and exploring and really pushing the boundaries now.
I love how many different, diverse, eclectic experiences you've been at. You are one of these people that are in the margins of history in this industry, as far as you've just been in so many rooms and been a part of so many cool projects. Can you speak at all to, there is always this push and pull of, are we honoring story or are we honoring the technology? What can we do? What can't we do? Is there like the earliest project, that first moment where the two truly worked in tandem and supported each other and you went, aha, this is it?
I think that the first time that that really came into play with me, and this hasn't even come into fruition yet, actually. It was a research project that was started at the University of Virginia, and it was all around believable agents. So there was a project called the Oz Project, which ended up at Carnegie Mellon University. And the team that was researching believable agents was building a drama manager on the back end. And the drama manager would act as essentially a stage manager delivering narratives. And this is kind of pre the latest AI push. And that for me is where this is all heading. Like right now, we're kind of in an uncomfortable middle ground, right? Where you have practitioners that are coming from theater, from film, from music video, and they're trying to do what they did before, but do it in immersive worlds. And you have technologists that are used to coding, but not necessarily knowing how to collaborate with a more artistic side. And they're all trying to put whatever shape their peg is into whatever hole this is going to become, and none of it works, right? So we're using all these old vestiges to try and create something new. But where it's headed once you get to generative narratives and AI, that is to me the holy grail of where it's all going. So, all of this in between is both developing the technology, developing the artists, and ultimately developing our audiences.
I love that. What do you think is currently the biggest hurdle for audiences to connect to this type of storytelling?
Well, so I'm gonna call you on the word storytelling, because that's
Okay.
the biggest hurdle, is that audiences are very used to receiving content that is being told to them through framed mediums, through their screens, through their phones, through their television sets, through, a menu or a book page. Like that is how we are used to consuming content. So inevitably, when you put somebody in an immersive environment, if they aren't naturally intuitively a gamer, who's tends to run around and explore, they're like, well, what's my role? Am I supposed to sit here? Am I supposed to engage? To what level am I supposed to engage? How do I engage? What button do I push? Like all of those interactive nuances that are more psychological hurdles than content hurdles or technology hurdles, are where we're hiccuping right now with the audience. And a lot of that goes back to the language that we're using.
So do you see that being equivalent to like early movies of a train? The audience like ran out of the theater because they didn't understand the train wasn't coming at them?
100%. Yes. And if you think about the language in that case, right? What they were calling cinema in the early days, right? They were calling it moving pictures. We still call it moving pictures or movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or photo plays, right? Plays that were photographed. And the way that the industry is talking about it sets up and cues up how the audience perceives it, right? So once you start to have your own vernacular, and once you start to say, oh no, this is something different, and it sounds different, and it means something different, and therefore when my mind sees this moving picture, it's not just a picture on a wall that happens to move. It is cinematic. It is its own industry. It is its own way of communicating. Its own artistic form.
I love that. Do you feel we've all come out of this, or we are coming out of this year of being forced into a virtual layer of work, play, entertainment, everything? Do you think that that has helped us gain more vocabulary in the direction you think we're headed? Or do you think that we've now conflated the idea of participatory media and virtual?
Well, we reverted back to the frames that we're all familiar with for the most part, right? I mean, you're seeing an uptick in VR headset sales, and certainly people are engaging, and people that are creating conferences are trying to make things a little bit more interactive. And on the event side, you're seeing a virtual component being added to any in-person live event that's being put together. But on the audience side, I think that right now you start to feel, oh, I feel trapped in that frame. I feel like, Zoom fatigue. Like there's only so much I can look at these boxes and try to make it replicate the real world. And so that desire, that human instinct of I want more or this can be more will drive something. But I don't think that we as an industry have facilitated that evolution of thought, that change of paradigm.
Do you think that audiences want to be that participatory? Do you think that generationally we're already seeing a generation that is more tech native and is more media native, and it's about kind of creating and curating media rich experiences that they are participants in, as well as commenters on, as well as curators of, as well as spectators of, that role is far more fluid in a younger generation than it has traditionally been? And do you think that that's true of all audiences in the future? Or what? I would love to talk more about this kind of like weird, speaking of like diverse perspectives. I think you and I have never really weighed into this conversation, but I don't know that we even necessarily feel the same way about audiences. And I think that's exciting.
Yes, um, I think there's a tendency to go with the familiar, right? Anytime there's something unfamiliar, especially through technology, people are very weary, right? It's, when trains first started going really fast, it was like, "Ooh, ladies, don't get on the train. Your uterus might fly out." Right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
when I was filming in Africa and we were in Kenya, our crew that we were rolling around with, there was one person who would not get on the escalator at a local mall because that was it, the only way it could be moving is through spirits, and she didn't want that close contact with spirits. Right. So anytime, and that was just a couple years ago. So anytime there's new technology, there's a fear of that new technology. That being said, there's a new generation through which this technology is not new,
Right.
right? They're very native. And so it is not something that is being introduced to them for which there is no explanation. Why is there a voice coming through a telephone? It must be a haunted, disembodied spirit. Yeah. There's all sorts of explanations that we make up when we don't understand. And as generations assimilate and incorporate that into their everyday way of being, like the younger generations that are much more digitally native now, then that adaptation hurdle, dissipates. So, stories and audiences is there more media? Yes, there's more media.
Right.
Are they engaging with the media in a different way? There's quite a bit of data that says yes, right? They're expecting it to be more interactive. They're expecting to play a part of it. When you look at brands, especially why 29 Rooms was such a success at Refinery 29, we didn't slap logos and things on all of the spaces that you would walk into. We distilled their product or whatever their messages was down into a visceral, gorgeous experience that people then said, oh, this resonates with how I interact with the world, is how I want, how I'm interacting with this product right now. So, it becomes, the end of storytelling is not just about narrative and theatrical experiences. It is very much also about brands, about marketing, and how all forms of story are evolving.
Cool. On that note, you wrote a book.
Indeed.
People didn't stop reading. Do you think that there will always be a yes and to all forms of media? What I've noticed in a lot of the VR implementation is like theater, like purists feel like we're coming for theater. And I'm like, no, like theater's fine, dude. Like theater's going to be there. It's not going anywhere. This is just something new and different and else. And that's kind of my culture on it, is the idea that there's room for it all. But do you believe that it is a true evolution away from?
I think that it's not necessarily an evolution. I think it's more of a paradigm shift, right?
Okay.
Where evolution, like there's a natural progression, right? You're like, oh, this led to this, led to this. And then there are paradigm shifts where things happen, where it's like, oh, the sun doesn't revolve around the earth because now we can actually see into space and see, where the stars are and explain how that relationship could work in a way that defies what centuries of expectations and stories have told us is the truth, right? So it's like a earthquake, it's like a paradigm shift. And even with an earthquake, you might change the geography a little bit, but the structure's still there, right? And ultimately, we're still people, we're still human, and that's what it always comes back to, is who is consuming and engaging in the story and the experience, and it's us. So you can't take us out of the equation. So there will, yes, and absolutely, Brendan, there will be stories, there will be storytelling, there will be campfires till the end of time, and hopefully that's not too soon. Hopefully, it's not something that my son will see.
Right.
That will always be there. That being said, there has been a paradigm shift, and what is possible now was not remotely possible, 100 years ago. And so, to embrace it, we also have to change how we think about it.
Cool. And do you see that being part of the role of an entity like the Fifth Wall Forum?
I feel like the Fifth Wall Forum, we really targeted our creatives, right? Whether it's creative in programming or creative in directing or acting or, 3D artists, like we're an industry specific organization that's really meant to build that up. Once we start building that up together as a collective and saying, oh, here's what I'm building, what are you building? We start sharing, we start creating content that audiences go, oh, this is interesting. Okay, well, I'll dip my toe in here and I'll dip my other toe in there. The more there is for audiences to play with, that will evolve. But I feel like with Fifth Wall Forum that we've really focused on developing the industry side of it. Do you feel that way?
I do. I think that definitely it is kind of capital C community first, was kind of our initiative. But I think a lot of that also just came from the fact that we reached out. We have never had a marketing budget. We've never had any budget.
Fact.
So it's our reach was really all of the core members of the Fifth Wall Forum reaching out across their existing networks of collaborators and professional contacts to say, do you all want to kind of jam on some of these ideas for a bit? Which was that, like, everybody's shut down right now. Nobody really feels a sense of agency. And could we give people a community that gave them back some of that permission and that agency? Is what I've always kind of interpreted.
Yeah, and I think that as we all talked from the different perspectives that we came from and realized, theater has been shown immersive technology, that conferences have presented hardware, that there are different places to go to see what's already been done. What we kept coming back to was that there was no place for people that are creators to meet each other. And that's one of the hardest things to do, right? If you're working on Broadway and developing for Broadway, like that's your community. So to know where to even go to say, hey, how do I find somebody that works in Unity? How do I find somebody that, understands which headsets we should be using or where to integrate holograms into a show or whatever it is? That's a stretch. It's outside your typical boundaries of what you're developing. And so creating that sandbox and that playground where we could say, hey, you're a director, you're an actor, you're a programmer, you develop, cool stuff in Tilt Brush. Like, come together, like find what you guys gel around and learn how to talk to each other, see what comes out of it, see where your ideation takes you. I mean, that's the biggest challenge that we all solve from our own perspectives, which is where the connector program came from.
Yeah. So we came together 9 months ago. We've produced 2 events, out of which 9 presented prototypes were revealed to the community. We have a community online in Discord of about 300 people. Why should more people join this sandbox?
Oh, so good. I love it. I think that innately artists are curious, programmers are curious. When you're trying to develop something and the tools that you have in front of you are just not the magic that you're looking for, or you're realizing maybe there's a different way of doing something, that having a safe space where you can ask the dumb questions, where you can listen in on what people are developing, when you can go to Artifact Fridays and see what people are putting out there, you know, that is not only a source of inspiration, but that source of that capital C community that you were talking about. And it becomes a place where you can absorb, where you can share, where you can develop, and there are just no dumb questions.
So I'm going to call us both out. We've been dropping some buzzwords, and in any technological conversation, there's always some, cool words people use. What I love about the Fifth Wall Forum is we have our own vocabulary, but it's all really dumb words, and I really enjoy that. Can you talk to people about the reveal and the fraude and the connector and the RAS and all that, and get us into, from your end, what is the kind of inside scoop on the lingo of the Fifth Wall
Yes,
Forum?
this was something that we struggled with when we were talking about, let's just start with the reveal, right? The March reveal. When you've got a bunch of people that have been working together and overcoming all obstacles of no financial support, of not speaking the same language, of timelines and deadlines, of being on five, I think, different continents that we had,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
presenting something can become a bit of a bear. And there is a tendency, and I think this is you, Brendan, who is like, you can make a polished deck, but that doesn't mean that you understand what it takes to get this on its feet, or what it's going to look like when you get it on its feet. So creating something, a vertical glimpse, that's another language thing that we created, which is based on the vertical slice from the gaming industry, which Alex brought in. Like, we didn't want it to be a presentation. We didn't want it to be something where it was just a deck that was being shown and talked through. And it had this vertical glimpse, a very small functioning prototype of a piece of moment in the experience that you're building. So this being part of the process and wanting this to be a step in the both the professional evolution of the people that are involved and the projects themselves, we're like, what's the word that reflects what we're trying to do? So rather than just using industry words of this is a pitch, this is a presentation, we're like, this is a reveal where you're at, reveal where you've gotten to, how you got here, and where you want to go from here. And so that's where the word reveal came from. The rah rah, the halfway point was, we called it a rah rah, right? It's like,
Right.
is it a
Like, we're just
check in?
cheering you on.
Totally. And that's like, we really wanted to absorb and reflect the ethos. Like, this isn't a competition.
Yeah, it's not Shark Tank. We were very big on that.
Right. And to help each other and give each other constructive feedback and encourage people to keep going. Like, what's a word? I think Sam was saying, like, yeah, you just like, we're gonna cheerlead them on, rah rah rah, and I'm like, rah rah, that's it, we're gonna rah rah.
And then out of that, we started asking people to kind of, in preparation for, well, what do I reveal? We said, well, along the way, why don't we every week drop in where you're at? Like, start revealing early and often so you can start building some of that documentation, some of those assets, which led to Artifact Fridays, because we started trying to put raw into every word that we said, because we're those kind of people.
And I think that there was great camaraderie when we did that.
Oh, no, get
Oh,
out, get out.
yeah,
That's
I
it.
went
And that's the
there.
end of the podcast. Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, but it was meant to engage and excite and share, and it not just be something where it's like you're being judged. This is a judge-free zone. Like, take risks, go to the place that's uncomfortable, like, be an artist in the true sense of the word, whether your art is code or assets or movement.
So, from the outside of any institution, it can be hard to know the thoughtfulness that goes into the design or the implementation or the strategy. And I do really honor the commitment you've had to the thoughtfulness we've put into literally the words we're using, which is incredible. How can people get involved in the Fifth Wall Forum? And can you speak to the thoughtfulness, especially that went into how you designed the Connector
Yeah.
series?
Well, the last podcast that you did with Haley, I thought was so enlightening as to how Haley even got involved, right? She's like, I don't know what this is, but this sounds really cool. And these sound like great people. And this is where I want to be. So I don't think that that Fifth Wall Forum is a place where you have to know your place. It's not a job application. It's not a, this is what I do, and so I fit into this particular slot. It very much is, hey, this is the skill set that I come with, but I want to reach out into and branch out into other areas, or I want to collaborate with people that have different skill sets than what I'm used to, and I'm just curious about what's going on. I love live performance. Technology frightens me and intimidates and excites me. All of this comes together with Fifth Wall Forum, and I say that, and then of course for the connector program specifically, we had an application, and the application was intentionally thoughtful, meaning, yes, you put your skill set in, but also what's your favorite live moment on the stage? What kind of technologies are you interested in? Like, what kind of story gets you excited? What genres are compelling to you? And we did this intentionally to craft the groups that we would put people together in. And ultimately, Alex Kulum and Brandon and I sat down for hours and hours on end and just did a high level and said, okay, well, who are these really exciting, passionate people? And what's the best way to create a successful team out of it, not knowing how, how's this going to all turn out?
So it was kind of like matchmaking.
It was, but it was informed matchmaking. I based it on when I was back at Carnegie Mellon, we would build interactive virtual worlds in a matter of 2 weeks with all of our other course loads and things like that. And
Amazing.
yes, it was. And what was really cool with it is there would be 4 team members, and there were roles that everybody could step into, but you could be a programmer and step into the narrative role. You could be a narrative person and be like, I really want to try modeling. So you weren't forced into doing something based on what your skill set was. And I adapted that open model for the connector program. So we had 5 people in each category, and some people had a coding background, but maybe wrote down, listen, I don't want to code in this project. I really want to stretch my wings. And we took that into consideration. So we'd have a really strong programmer and maybe team them up with somebody that could support them on the narrative side. So and make sure that people that loved musicals weren't in the same group as people that were like, don't ever put me, in a musical. So,
Right.
there's a lot of
Right.
thought and consideration that went into how that was all ultimately structured, but it came back from my roots of college and building virtual worlds 20 years ago.
I feel like in the context of this, you have to also talk about how you came up with the team names.
They were cool, right? I got a little bit of pushback for
Yes.
them.
Really? Who gave you
I'm not gonna
pushback?
name names.
We can cut that part out of the podcast. I actually didn't know there was any pushback.
But I did get some shout outs later on the Discord and Twitter, and I did get a text from that person who was like, you are vindicated. You are completely vindicated. Not that I needed to be, because I loved the idea of all the team names, instead of being 1, 2, 3, and 4, being thematically connected.
Right.
And so there was Team Sutherland, there was Team Sao Lan Wu, Banksy. So I really wanted to stretch us out and bring in people from physics, people from Southeast Asia, people from Africa, people from comics, men, women, all across the board that were connected with one simple theme. They were all masters of illusion.
Excellent.
I don't know how many people figured that. I think it was David Gotchfeld, who was on Team Houdini, which was a bit of a giveaway, was figured out what the common thread was.
Well, and the teams really fell in love with their names and their identity, which I think was so cool to watch them really start embracing the idea of like, oh, I'm doing this project. And it took on kind of that almost collegiate, which is so funny because you borrowed it from a collegiate experience, but this idea of this is fun and on the side and scrappy and weird, and it's being done on like pizza money, and we're just making a thing in our free time, which I think was kind of an infectious energy and currency that ran through the entire reveal.
Yes, and that camaraderie, that those people camaraderie,
Oh no.
every several of the teams have continued to go on to keep building. They are applying for grants, they're in talks with distributors. They are working with live performance artists to work through script and narrative elements. There actually have been quite a few too that have been picked up by the mentors. We had a rock star roster of mentors to work on paying jobs. So people have gotten paying gigs out of this. People have gotten friendships and professional relationships that they continue to leverage to this day. And I think that that is what Fifth Wall Forum is all about.
That's amazing. So, with all of that in our past, what is it that you see in the future for Fifth Wall Forum? What makes you keep showing up? For those that don't know, we have a weekly meeting that none of us are being paid. Like, we just like each other's company at this point, but also we're still crafting this thing and very thoughtfully trying to figure out where it should go next and what it should represent and who should be involved. And so what makes you show up every Friday for our informal meeting?
I think a huge part of it is the incredible team that we've assembled with this founding board. It's so every time we're all together, I learn something from somebody. And those conversations and being open to, not one of us has the right answer, but collectively we arrive at the right answer and being, it's a challenge. It's something that when you work in the corporate world or you work with the client, you're expected to have the right answer, and to be in a room where people are saying, well, this is what I see, and somebody else is like, well, I'm actually seeing this, and you're able to flex that. Oh, okay, so here are different perspectives, but where is that Venn diagram where it all overlaps is beautiful and exciting and harmonizing in the most chaotic kind of way. So I think like our team is, I'm very excited to see what comes next out of our team, but keeping in touch with everybody that's participated, hearing the stories afterwards of like the Bring Your Production virtual that you led in December when on that first event, and then having someone that I knew that participated call me up and say, hey, I went through the devise step and here's what I came up with. Like they went through and they worked on it. And it was somebody that was a performer who had never really done immersive tech other than when I had convinced her to get in do some Beat Saber and a headset. So she came out with this amazing meditative experience, and I'm like, this is what it's all about. She's like, I don't even know if it's any good, but this feels right to me. And the more different perspectives that we have coming in from different avenues saying this feels right, I want to create for this audience that isn't the tech culture that's already ingrained in the technology, the more diverse productions are going to come out, the more exciting opportunities, the bigger an audience we're going to reach. So there's a lot of inspiration that I see happening around Fifth Wall Forum. I think that brings us all together and, has us all putting up with each other in our meetings.
So for people who are listening that were not a part of the previous reveal or kickoff event, do you foresee us having another application process in the coming months that someone would be able to get involved and maybe be a part of one of these teams in the future?
I'm not going to pigeonhole us. Knowing our group, there's something awesome coming right down the line. But there is on the website fifthwallforum.com if you want to stay in touch. Definitely drop your name, drop your email address into that, and as soon as there's an announcement, you'll be the first to know.
Well, we have an anniversary show in August. So if we make our podcast in August, maybe a little bit of a review of our own. Maybe we'll have more information then.
That sounds perfect. I love that.
What is the most satisfying consumer experience for you, Stephanie?
The most satisfying consumer experience?
For entertainment, like consuming entertainment.
Oh, that's such a good question. I love it all. I think I go through phases. Like there was a time when I went to every concert that was coming through town, right? And there was a time that I played every game, and there was a time that I was absorbed in movies, and there was a time that courtesy of my son that I actually watched all episodes of The Office, which I'd never done before. Right. And there are times when all I want to do is sit in a black box theater and be in the presence of whatever talent is right there, and I feel their vibrations. And there's a time when I want to sit in front of a computer and hack away at a game engine. So I go through my phases, and I think that or read, oh my gosh, reading books, I love it, or listening to music, all of it, everything. I'll consume everything, listening to podcasts. but it's wherever I am in my curiosity.
So they're kind of like cyclical patterns or phases where you get into things for a period of time and then wander into different in between modes.
Yeah, I feel like, your brain kind of functions. What do they say? Like every 7 years, you are a completely new person, right?
Yeah,
All
you've
your cells have
regrown all your
regenerated.
cells.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that part of that is like as a creative or even as a business person or even as, a dancer or somebody that's moving, like that's as you're moving through space and absorbing, it's like, oh, okay, I've got that information. Now I'm curious about that.
Okay.
So I have a tendency to deep dive and obsess and then be like, okay, next.
So, okay, I want to jump on this because I'm just going to nerd out until you have to go. What I get very fascinated by is the obsession people have right now with the metaverse and this like interoperability of everything. When
Yes.
do you want to be, when you're in your phases, do you want to be like working on a game engine and then like reading fiction about a game engine that like takes over with AI and then also watching a movie that's like based on that book? Like, do you like the kind of transmedia movement between, or do you find yourself really loving a specific genre or mode at a time?
That's an awesome question that came up after I gave a talk about the metaverse in Copenhagen, I think last month, virtually.
I was going to say, you went to
And I get,
Copenhagen last month?
I know it's amazing the things that we
I
can
know.
do, right? Well, and I gave a talk about the metaverse as you, right? And I think that the metaverse can be very intimidating because people are like, "Oh my gosh, it's Ready Player One. It's going to come and take our lives over," or it's NFTs and now nothing's going to be real. And everybody's like, "But I don't even understand what NFTs are and like how does a digital asset have value? Good blockchain, what?" And there's so much there that it's hard to wrap your brain around how it all comes together. But just like in the real world, you kind of find your niche, right? Like you kind of find your way into understanding and your place in your space that you take up in this amazing thing called life. And the metaverse is no different, right? You're not going to be all things to all people. And I think one of the most frustrating things to me is time limitations of wanting to absorb so much and knowing there's so much incredible creativity, but also knowing there's a lot of creativity in my two kids and there's a house that needs to be taken care of and my family and my friends that I care so dearly about. It's like there's only so much to give. And if we transition over into this metaverse where everything is content, everything is media, and we don't base it in the truth of just breathing and looking somebody in the eye and trusting and having those connections, then I don't think that what it's founded on is going to be very meaningful either. So I think we've all got to kind of keep this balance um, of what we're exploring and how what's informing what we're exploring.
I love this. I was just listening to Jason Saran, who's a mentalist who's had a virtual show.
Jason,
Yes.
yes.
And he just said this beautiful quote about we talk about art like it's breathing, right? That you need to do it to live. But breathing is inhaling and exhaling. And if you're always putting out, you're never taking the moment to go in. And I love that you're talking about this same balance that I absolutely suck at. And I really admire how articulate and conscious you are of the idea of like, you're a badass doing a lot of cool stuff, but then you also have such an investment in self and family, or at least from the outside. So I'll give you those kudos. But can you speak at all to that balance, how you make space for that?
Well, do you think that your balance is thrown off because of the pandemic? Like, do you feel like you have not been able to go out and do the things that you normally would have done, or do you feel like it's always been that way?
No, it's always been that way. I have always said that if I drank the way I work, people would have sat me down by now. Like, I have an unhealthy relationship with work.
Well, there's a reason I only buy one bottle of wine at a time. Uh, because I totally feel you on that.
But neither of us take on one project at a time. So how do we make that analogy work?
Yeah, you don't sleep, I guess, is the brutal. I mean, it's the weird truth of it all. It's like when I was writing the end of storytelling, when I was finishing that up, I was also working 80 hours a week at Refinery 29 and
Wow.
in like renovating a house and like doing all of these
Yeah.
things. But actually, if I think back to it, when I started writing that book was I had all these pages. Speaking of pages, my printer's like, I need more pages and just decided to go off right now. Um,
See,
but
this is why I'm scared of AI. You want to bring it in, and I'm like, I don't know, man. That printer does not need to be sentient.
like right now for my next book, I have all these post-it notes that are up and I just like jot things down. I write them down, right? So it's not something where I am necessarily sitting down and working on it. And then at one point I'm like, you know what? I'm ready. I'm ready to sit down. And I had the luxury of my son was stayed with his dad and I went to a pig farm in the middle of Tennessee. No joke. I went to a pig farm and I would write for as long as I wanted to and then I'd go walk and go play with the pigs or go on a hike or something like that.
Did they
And
know
for a
you were
solid
there? Were
week,
you an invited guest of the pig farm, or you just went and squatted on a pig farm?
I'm like, I'm about to get dirty. Let's do
Like,
this.
that's your next book. That's fantastic. I want that story.
No, it was an Airbnb, so it
Nice,
was it
nice.
was beautifully pristine. I just brought everything with me and I didn't leave. And I churned out the first draft, which was super academic and not very accessible. And then, I evolved it, over the course of a couple of years and really kind of bringing in a design element to it so that it is graphically represents what I want, like kind of visually the experience to be rather than just words on a page. But I did, so it's another one of those going through phases. For me, it wasn't like I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna write a book. It's like my brain was collecting all these thoughts on post-its and random things that I just kept in a folder, and then I picked that folder up and like just crashed it out for a week, and then would just kind of work on it from there and send it out to people that I trusted and be like, does this make sense?
Cool. The point of us starting this podcast was to check in with our community and to see if we could help, if we can support. And so I'd love to know, I know you're working on a lot of different projects. You may or not be able to like talk specifically about them. That's not the goal here. But is there something that you, Stephanie, need in this moment that would make a project you're working on just be able to jump to that next level?
There's so many needs right now, but I think for the purposes of this podcast and this audience and people that are tapping in going, what's next? How can I get involved? What I'm always looking for is any project that I'm working on, I always try and have a space for an apprenticeship or an assistant type space where I can bring somebody in to chime in with their thoughts, to listen and observe, to get dirty, because I think that there are so few opportunities for people to get involved, and to see other people working on it. And I always learn so much by watching other people work, by watching you work. You did such an incredible job bringing together the Fifth Wall Forum team, and it looked gorgeous. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, I'm just going to watch all of Brendan's YouTube videos.
Oh,
This is
no. Oh,
amazing.
no.
Yes, it's great. And so I'm always trying to create that opportunity for just to observe and absorb because I've learned so much that way by being able to do it in other spaces. So, if anybody is ever wanting to just be an apprentice and say, hey, I want to see how bringing AR to live performance can work. I want to see how designing an escape room for a branded partner can work. I just try and make them paid if at all possible. But I think that just not being afraid and reaching out and saying, hey, this is what I'm interested in. This is where I'm curious if it's going. How can I be involved? I'm always keeping a roster of those people.
So you heard it here. She volunteered. So, Stephanie, how should someone get in touch with you
I did.
if they want to put themselves on that
I
roster?
did volunteer. Absolutely. My email address is my first name.
I
Yes.
can now hear you like slowing down. Which one do I want to give?
I do have about way too many. But Stephanie at immersiverigs.com is a great way to get a hold of me and just give me a shout out with where you're at, what your skill set is, where you're looking to explore or experience. And if there's ever an opportunity, whether it's, if you're specifically interested in social justice or nonprofit or for profit or entertainment, I work across all of them. So, if it makes sense. I'm always looking for people to collaborate with too. So let's build up this energy and industry and get everybody um, with as much information because it's only going to make everything that we do better.
I feel better for having had this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. And I will see you at next week's meeting of the Fifth Wall Forum.
Absolutely, Brendan. I can't wait. Thanks for talking with me. It's always great to talk to you.
Thank you so much to Stephanie for the conversation. If you want to join the show, find me online at the handle Brendan A. Bradley or go to fifthwallforum.com. Also, you can contact Stephanie at immersiverigs.com. I'm Brendan Bradley, wishing you a happy Friday, and I'll see you next time.